Hi guys, my name is Eleven Darren. I'm a singer-songwriter from Hamilton, Ontario. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be playing for you guys today. I'm going to be singing a song that I did not write. I wish I had. I'm sure most of you will probably recognize it though. And without further ado, a paradise, put up a parking lot with a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging hot spot. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They pay paradise, put up a parking lot. They took all the trees, put them in a tree museum, and they charged the people $1.50 just to see them. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They pay paradise, put up a parking lot. Hey, farmer, put away the DDT now. Give me spots on my apples, but leave me the birds and the bees. Please, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They pay paradise, put up a parking lot. Late last night, I heard the screen door slam, and a big yellow taxi took away my old man. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They pay paradise, put up a parking lot. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They pay paradise, put up a parking lot. Yeah, they pay paradise, put up a parking lot. I said they pay paradise, put up a parking lot. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our meeting here tonight. Before we get started, I'm going to take a quick moment to review a few Zoom tips with you tonight. The first is that closed caption is available for this meeting, and you can turn it on by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and adjusting the subtitles there. You have been muted so we can hear from all of our wonderful speakers here tonight, but we do want to hear from you as well, so we encourage you to use the chat box, and we'll ask that you get started by saying hello, your name, and where you're from, and why you're joining us here tonight. This meeting will be recorded so we can share it with you afterwards. And if you do have any questions and you're joining over the phone or any tech, having any tech concerns during the meeting, feel free to email Megan at wellingtonwaterwatchers.ca or send us a message in the Zoom chat. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Summer to get us started.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for being here tonight. So most of us here tonight are listening in from somewhere on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. This land we are on right now has a few governing rules, and I want to take the time to cover some of them with you. The first one I'm sure many of you have heard of is the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Agreement. This agreement was put in place in these lands over 900 years ago by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, comprising of the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk peoples, and the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Mississauga, Saulteaux, and Algonquin peoples. This wampum belt describes the land gifted to these nations by Creator as a dish filled with food and medicine plants, water, tree people, animal people, space, and everything anyone could need to stay healthy and fed. Every nation at the table is to be fed with the same spoon, sharing the contents of the dish fairly and equally with one another. Only what is needed is to be taken from the dish, with contents being left over for the next person who will eat. And the dish and table are to be kept clean and cared for. No knives are to be brought to the table to threaten the peace, and so long as these laws are followed, all needs will be met. The next wampum belt agreement I would like to share with you is called the Two-Row Wampum. This belt was created much later than the dish with one spoon wampum belt and contains 2 lines running down its length, which represent the paths taken by 2 boats sailing side by side down a river. The first boat is a birch bark canoe carrying the languages, traditions, customs, laws, and peoples of the indigenous nations of Turtle Island. The second is a Dutch flute, a ship carrying the laws, languages, peoples, and lifestyles of the Europeans. These 2 boats sailed down the river side by side, never blocking each other's paths, allowing each other to steer their own ships, and respecting one another's possessions, cultures, and individuals. This brings us to today. We are here tonight to discuss an attack on the living water, the lifeblood of the earth, which houses the fish peoples and generously gives life. The land and water that we call Hamilton has been abused for centuries. As settlers, we've forgotten to only take our fair share of contents from the dish, to leave some for the next people to eat, and to clean the dish and table after we've finished. I hope that tonight we can all begin to take steps towards remembering that this land, the waters, and their creatures are alive, and it is our responsibility to care for them as they care for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. Summer is a second-year biology student at UVic in BC, and she's our Save Our Streams graphic artist who made all the lovely graphics. And she's also my daughter, so I'm very proud of her tonight, gotta say that. I'd also like to thank 11 Darren for that beautiful rendition of Big Yellow Taxi, and Megan and everyone from Wellington Water Watchers who have helped us greatly to organize this meeting. So hello and welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for choosing to spend the next little while with us tonight. I'm Nancy Hurst. I'm one of the organizers of Save Our Streams Hamilton, and I'll be co-hosting this community meeting along with my friend and fellow SOS member, Alex Wilson.
Thanks so much, Nancy, and thanks so much, Summer, as well. You know, and like thanks to all of you, like already seeing neighbors in the chat, connecting with each other, going, oh, we live beside each other, we must be neighbors. Like that's really, you know, so great to see, and like why we want to be here today, because you know, we're all here to save the Garner Marsh, and we're going to get into that. But I just really want to go back to what Summer said, and really in recognizing that we are on Indigenous land and the violent and ongoing history that kind of got us here, we can better understand the ways our governance system today is failing both our community and our water. Right now, we're in a system where all the processes in place are favoring big industry and connected developers, as opposed to community advocates who have repeatedly spoken up. We are here today because despite the fact that the Hamilton Conservation Authority has rejected the permit in front of the application by the developers to destroy the Garner Marsh and replace it, offset it with an artificial wetland, a storm water pond, the developers appealed that denial of their permit to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So we're going to tell you a little bit more about how we've been fighting to save the Garner Marsh up until now, what's at risk, and how with all of you and how connecting together, we can save the Garner Marsh at the Ontario Land Tribunal, and we can protect nature in Hamilton and hopefully across Ontario. And so, yeah, Nancy, how are we going to get there?
All right, well, first of all, so excited to be joined by a roster of incredible speakers, from planning lawyers to politicians, water protectors, and wetland specialists, and neighbors of the marsh, who will all share their perspectives on why it's essential that we come together today to save the Garner Marsh. Just before we get started though, if we can pose upon you, we're very curious to know how you found out about our rally tonight, because we did a whole bunch of different sorts of promotions. So we'd really like to know if it's okay, we're gonna launch a poll on the screen. And if you folks can just hit a button and tell us where we should direct our energies for next time, that would really help us. Thank you so much for doing that. Oh, Facebook's pulling ahead. It's like a horse race, but there's no money involved. Oh, Facebook's going back now. Other. Other is very intriguing. Maybe that means word of mouth even. Alex, we need to do better with Twitter and Instagram. I think we're good. Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nancy. And we are really excited about the program we have in front of us today. We're going to hear from some great speakers. We're going to really help you meet the marsh through following the flow and kind of seeing what's at stake and how connected it is to so much of the city and the community we live in. But to get us started tonight, I'm so excited to be introducing a clip from our first speaker, Makasha Looking Horse. Makasha was born on 6 nations of Grand River Territory and is Mohawk and Lakota. She has completed rites of passage through both Lakota and Mohawk ceremonies and has been a women's Sundance leader for 11 years. Makasha is also a youth leader on 6 nations for water protection and security, Oneganos, a global water futures research project. As well, she hosts a live stream podcast series called Oneganos Let's Talk Water, which recently won the David Suzuki People's Choice Award. Thank you so much, Makasha, for joining us.
Sego soy Grego Makashigets, Kenikahagan Yoko Honjore, Wakatuhuni. My name is Makasha Looking Horse. I'm from 6 Nations, Ontario, right beside Hamilton. And I am a student at McMaster University, and I wear many hats in my community, and that's including protecting water. And so I have went against Nestle and went against Blue Triton for stealing our aquifer water. And I got asked to say a few words about why is it important to Indigenous peoples, but like why is it important to all of us? And so a really important reason that we need to protect water is because we cannot live without it. Nothing can. Not the birds outside, not the trees. We won't be able to have sap anymore. And we all grew up in water because water was our first environment. As babies, it's our first environment, and it protects us. Water has protected all of us, and it keeps us alive every single day. And we are running out of water globally. There's only less than 2% of fresh water in the entire world. And most of that is in Canada. So we need to really protect all of our water. And there's a lot of countries that are going without, and I really don't want our future generations to have to worry about that. And that's why we need to protect all of the marshes, protect all of the aquifers, and protect the rivers and the streams and the lakes, all that we can. And we need to come together so that we can do those things, because there's huge companies out there like Nestle, like Blue Triton, that want to take the water and sell it, and they don't believe that water is a human right, and which is completely outrageous because nothing can live without it. And so that's why we all need to come together and fight for water. Not just Indigenous people do, but right now Indigenous peoples are in the forefront for fighting for water rights, because most of our reserves don't have any access to clean drinking water. And that's including 6 Nations. Even though we're right beside Hamilton, right beside Toronto, we don't have access to clean drinking water. And some of our residents of 6 Nations have no running water in their household whatsoever. And so 6 Nations is in a water crisis, but so is the entire world, because we don't have a lot of it. It's running out because big corporations are either destroying the marshes and destroying the land, and or they're stealing the water, or they're stealing all of the aquifer water so that everything runs dry. And it's not good for all of us. And so we need to protect everything, and protect the land and protect the water. And I think that what everybody is doing is really great with protecting the land and protecting the water, and we really need to come together and rise above. And this is what right here is a treaty that Canada made with my nations, the Haudenosaunee Nation, and this is called a two-row wampum. And this means that we stay in our boat and you guys stay in your boat. And by destroying the lands and not giving any land back and completely stealing and disregarding Indigenous peoples' land and water, you're not staying in your boat. So you really need to honor the Two-Road Treaty and know your place as Canada, as these corporations, and not continue to colonize our waters and colonize our lands. So just know this treaty still exists, and Canada made it, along with all of the other treaties that are there, but they totally disregard us. You can definitely stand beside us and fight for clean water and fight for protecting our water and protecting our lands, because we really need to protect it. It's not looking good right now since we're in a climate crisis and in a water crisis. So whatever you can do to help is greatly appreciated. Nyawe.
Wow, Mikasa, that was a clip. I wish she was here in person, but we have to thank her every day for the fight that she fights every day, just to not only to have clean water access for her own people, but she's fighting the fight for all of us. So I think we need to get behind her there. I first heard Mikasa speak at the Hamilton climate strike, which I think was in 2018, and I was shocked to learn about the water issues that are suffered by our Six Nations neighbors, which is only a short distance from Hamilton, as she said. So I'm so grateful, I'm sure we all are, for the fight that she fights every day for water. So jumping right in with our next speaker, I'm so pleased to announce that we are joined by Hamilton West Ancaster Dundas MPP Sandy Shaw. Sandy serves as the MPP for the Garner Marsh, as well as being the official opposition environment critic for the Ontario NDP. Sandy has always been a staunch defender of the marsh, speaking at past rallies and even showing up on site when, as you can see from the slide, the developer sprayed the crops around the marsh without notifying the leaseholding farmers, including Carrie, who we'll meet later. And as an MPP, Sandy has stood up with community groups and introduced legislation to protect water time and again, including the Cootes Paradise Water Accountability Act in the wake of the devastating sewer gate spill into Chinook Creek and Cootes Paradise. So thank you, Sandy, so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Nancy. And I didn't realize you took that picture. I look angry in that picture.
You were angry. You were really angry. That was right after the crops got sprayed.
Despite the silly hat I had on, I was mad as a hornet. So yes, I'm Sandy, and I just want to say how wonderful it is to be joined by so many people tonight. I mean, it just feels so wonderful, and it speaks to not only you're concerned about the environment and your community, but like this incredible determination that folks have been showing. So it is so commendable, and it's so heartwarming to see, because we all have to play a role to protect our wetlands, our farmlands, forests, nature, biodiversity, for future generations. And I just have to say, it's always I'm always mesmerized when I hear Mikasa speak. She's just it's so hard to follow that in some way. But the thing that I took from what she said there is she kept using the word steal, that people were stealing the water and stealing the land. And I think that I just wanted to say that to add to that, and it's probably what she was saying, I mean, that we're stealing the legacy for our next generation. So we should be the stewards of that, and it's being stolen from them by the powers that be. And many of you will have heard this story, but I want to tell it all the time. I have 8 grandkids. Like, I don't know, I didn't do all the work, but I have 8 grandkids, and I'm pretty proud of that. One of my grandkids, I'm sure you've heard the story, his name is Hawk. We were looking at something, and all of a sudden he turned to me like really upset with tears in his eyes and said, "Nan, will there be nature left when I grow up?" And I couldn't believe that a young person like this could have this kind of anxiety over this, about his future. So like a good grandmother, I lied and said, oh yes, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. But I internalized that we all have to be able to play a role, so that when, you know, when they ask us, what did we do when we had the chance to do it, we can stand proud and say we did everything we could to be able to hand this legacy to the future generations. So yeah, given what I've just said, I mean, it just seems unbelievable that we should be having to fight our own government and you know, large corporations for these basic protections for what is so precious, especially because we know, or we should know, that we're in a climate crisis. Unfortunately, this particular government, we've just seen that they just steamrolled all of the community's decisions. They're steamrolling municipal government decisions. They basically, I don't even know if are any environmental protections left in the province, maybe a couple. We still have the Environmental Bill of Rights, but they basically eroded or watered down almost all the environmental protections. You know, we saw them like kneecap. One of the first things they did was kneecap conservation authorities' ability to do their role, which is to, you know, protect the integrated water system. So it's, you know, as an environment critic, that was hard to take. But also the flip side of that is I've met so many people across the province, like you folks here tonight, that are fighting back, right? So they've been fighting back a bit against these ridiculous MZOs, fighting back about, you know, this government just giving away groundwater for pennies, and corporations like Nestle and Blue Triton, which I always mention. If you could come up with a name for an evil corporation, Blue Triton would be in the script. You'd have to have a Hollywood scriptwriter to come up with that. So, you know, and biodiversity, the attacks on our endangered species, people are rallying despite having been so distracted by COVID. People, you know, they are on it and they understand what's going on with this government. And I just have to say that, you know, it's people power, right? It's people power, and it works. And I couldn't also be more proud to say that there's a movement made in Hamilton that is spreading across the province. And that is the same Safe Farmland, Stop Sprawl movement. So we all, what you've done, we should stand proud and say, you know, that this started in the Hammer. Like, it started in the Hammer. It's going across the province. We set the stage for this. We gave people the kind of courage and inspiration to do it. And it's pretty exciting to see that. We also, you know, we saw when people pushed back against the MZOs, like, you know, the Duffins Creek, when they're going to pave over a wetland. I mean, pave over a wetland. And, you know, to go back to the singer that opened this event tonight, singing Big Yellow Taxi. So, for dating ourselves, that was Joni Mitchell, right? And so, and the line that she has in there about put away the DDT, I think it's important to know that that was a fight that took place in the 70s to ban pesticides like DDT, and it was a people-powered you know, fight to ban DDT, and it was successful. So there's an example, you know, that this fight always goes on, and when it's our turn, we have to, you know, pick up the mantle. So I know, given who's on the call and how we feel about the Garner Marsh and what's at risk, that this is going to be another success that we can add to this growing list of people pushing back and fighting for our environment. And so, you know, we talked about everybody has to play a role, right? It was mentioned, the politicians, the lawyers, the community organizations, the grassroots organizations, the not-for-profits. We all have to, you know, row this boat together. And the role that I have been, you know, my, you know, limited contribution to this, or my contribution, you can decide whether it's limited or not. You know, that's for you to say, but we have been trying to engage people. So we did have a water town hall back before COVID, and Makasha spoke there. We also were honored to have Chief Arvo Lookinghorse, who came to that event, and he is the spiritual leader, the Lakota spiritual leader that was at Standing Rock, and he spoke to us about Standing Rock. And really, the wisdom that he was imparting is that we are all, Standing Rock is everywhere, and we are all part of Standing Rock. And that's simply, if you think about how the water flows in us and through us and how it connects us, was a powerful lesson. And then, you know, continuing on, we haven't stopped fighting and standing up for water protections. We my colleague Sol Mamakwa, who sits beside me in the legislature. We actually get in trouble every once in a while. We make fun of some of the MPPs across the way. That's just between us friends, but we do actually, have to behave ourselves. But I sit beside him. I've learned so much from him. He's from Kawitnong, and he has every day talks about water as a human right, boil water advisories, and that water is life. He and I, on the last World Water Day just passed, tabled 3 motions in the legislature to keep this fight going. We had a motion that was about ending drinking water advisory, so the boil water advisories and recognizing the water as a human right. We want, again, to continue to review the permit to take water for commercial bottling privatization uses, like protect our groundwater. And really, we need a provincial-wide strategy to protect our waterways across the province. So communities like this, we don't have to be doing it one-off all across Ontario. So, a new Democratic government would have a water strategy for the province that would oversee all of this. So we don't have to so we could protect all our streams, but not one at a time, that we would understand it as an integrated system that we need to protect. And so I wouldn't be a good politician if I didn't end by saying, we need a new government, and you probably know that. And I'm just reminding you that, in case you didn't already know, there's an election coming up on June 2nd. And there's another way to make your feelings known about how you feel this government has, what their record has been on protecting the environment and protecting water. My sense is, not very good. So thank you once again for everything you do. Thank you for having me. I'm always available to talk or meet. I am so honored to be part of this event this evening. So thank you.
Sandy, thank you so much. You always show up for Hamiltonians, and you are always available to talk. And I think you even I bumped into you in the market one time, and you gave me your text, your number, and said, just text me. And I did. And you've been super. So thank you so much. And also thank you for being the one Hamilton MPP who's on the right side of saving farmland. We all know where the other side's going. So now we have a real treat for you all. I'd like to introduce to you Save Our Streams member and our adventure guide, Craig Cassar, who will be taking us on a fantastic video journey along the path of the Ancaster Creek from top to bottom. So when I asked Craig for a bio that I could use to introduce him with, he sent me this. Craig is a boring guy with a camera and lots of free time who likes creeks. But I know better. In fact, Craig is an Ancaster resident, passionate about environmentalism, and he's part of Save Our Streams Hamilton. He volunteers with several local organizations, including the Hamilton Naturalist Club, Royal Botanical Gardens, Community Fridges, and Don't Get Lost Adventure Racing. He spent many years as a volunteer video reporter for Get Out There magazine, and this is his first environmental documentary. So please sit back and enjoy the first part of Follow the Flow.
Hi everyone, my name's Craig and I'm here at Coots Paradise, also known as Dundas Marsh in Hamilton, Ontario. I'm standing on the edge of Princess Point with a spectacular view of the marsh. You may know Hamilton by one of its nicknames, the City of Waterfalls, because of all the creeks and streams that flow over the Niagara Escarpment throughout the city. Many of those creeks end up here in Coots Paradise. At the west end of the marsh is the mouth of what begins as Ancaster Creek, a very important cold water creek that begins 10 kilometers away and 170 meters higher up on the escarpment. I'm going to take you on a personal tour of Ancaster Creek to show you why it's so important and why we need to protect it. So come on, let's follow the flow of Ancaster Creek. let's begin at the beginning. This is the Garner Marsh in Ancaster, Ontario, and headwaters of Ancaster Creek. It might not look like much to you right now, but don't underestimate its importance. It's one of the few wetlands remaining in Hamilton. Within the Ancaster Creek sub-watershed area, 96% of the wetlands have already been lost to development. Said differently, humans have already destroyed virtually all the wetlands in the area. And that's a huge concern because wetlands are nature's way of controlling water and preventing the flooding that we're so often seeing now during extreme weather events fueled by climate change. The precious rarity of these particular wetlands and their capability to manage flooding is not the only reason they and these headwaters are crucial for Hamilton. The source water for this creek comes from natural springs that emerge from the groundwater below where I'm standing. That creates water that is relatively cold compared to other creeks, and that allows it to support many unique species. So of course this area should be protected, right? Well, definitely, and yet there's an active proposal to build 1.3 million square feet of warehouses right here on top of the headwaters, destroying the marsh. I'll tell you more about this on our journey downstream. We're now 1.5 kilometers from where we started, heading north through Ancaster. We're in an area bound by the Garner neighborhood to the west, the Hamilton Golf and Country Club to the north, and Highway 403 to the south. This entire natural area is being considered for development, which would only put further stress on Ancaster Creek. And there's already shoreline erosion here, which can only get worse as development intensifies. At this point, the creek travels through private property on the Hamilton Golf and Country Club grounds. As it travels through the golf course, the creek meanders back and forth, which is what water will do when left in its natural state. This is an expensive private golf course, so few will ever be able to see it in person, but this aerial shot gives us a nice view of it. I hope you've enjoyed the first leg of our journey. I'll be back soon and we'll continue following the flow of Ancaster Creek.
Thanks so much for that video, Craig. It's really incredible, and I'm excited that we have 2 more parts. And like what really stands out for me is that no matter where you were, whether you're at the headwaters, whether you're in Coots Paradise, whether you were kind of just right before the golf course, the birds are just so evidently there. And Hamilton we just became a bird-friendly city. And that involves a commitment to protecting the birds that live in our city, not taking away or damaging their key habitats. So thanks so much for that, Craig. And now that we've really seen, and I'd say heard, just how alive the Garner Marsh is, I'm really excited to invite Dr. Don McLean to tell us about what the campaign's been like so far to protect the Garner Marsh, and I'll say a very successful campaign to date to protect the Garner Marsh so far. And so Don's the longtime chair of Friends of the Red Hill Valley. He's the co-founder of Environment Hamilton, Hamilton 350, Citizens at City Hall, So quite a legacy. Don's a retired university lecturer in environmental studies, and he was recently awarded an honorary doctorate of laws by McMaster University. So thanks so much for joining us here tonight, Don, and thanks so much for all of your work up until this point and really on this campaign.
Thanks so much, Alex. And thanks to everybody else who's participated and put this together tonight. I get the easy part, just giving you some of the history of how we got to the point we're at now with respect to the Garner Marsh. So in the fall of 2020, developers approached the Hamilton Conservation Authority with a scheme for 140 Garner Road, and that's where the marsh is located, and its prime agricultural lands, and specifically its large cattail marsh. They wanted conservation policy set aside so the marsh could be relocated, or more precisely destroyed and replaced with a pond in a location more convenient to their plans so they could construct 5 large warehouses and many acres of parking lots. In response, a majority of the Conservation Authority Board directed their staff to draft an offsetting policy to accommodate these plans. That was in the fall of 2020. But after seeing the draft of the policy last spring, the developers pushed ahead with their remove replace proposal. That generated huge public opposition, including over 200 letters to the Conservation Authority and 7 citizen delegations to the board. After 90 minutes behind closed doors, the board took the unprecedented step of completely rejecting the permit application. Score a victory. The owner of 140 Garner responded by having the agricultural fields sprayed with pesticides and the crops destroyed. And you saw some of that in Sandy Shaw's material. This was done even though the farmers renting the fields had paid their annual fees. In the next few months, 300 citizens submitted written comments, this is last summer, on the 6,000-word draft offsetting policy of the Conservation Authority. And as a direct result, CA professional staff recommended against an offsetting policy. In November, the board agreed, despite the very public disappointment of the board chairman. It appears the developers were counting on the opposite result. Score another victory for resident action. In the meantime, the developers appealed the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. This is the replacement for the Ontario Municipal Board. Unfortunately, this appeal is about more than 140 Garner Road and the proposal in that location. If successful, it could overturn the protection of wetland and natural features by conservation authorities all across the province. The money behind this assault on the Garner Marsh and environmental rules across Ontario is from an Alberta government corporation. The Alberta Investment Management Corporation, AIMCO, is also the 2/3 owner of the Coastal GasLink fracked gas pipeline that is being forced through the unceded lands of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation in British Columbia with the frequent help of the RCMP. The Ontario Land Tribunal expects to hear the appeal next year. Environmental Defence has obtained party status in the hearings, thus ensuring that the marsh will have a voice there. The Hamilton 350 Committee and Save Our Streams Hamilton are fundraising for the hearings, and that's what this rally is about tonight. We're also standing up to several other warehouse plans that threaten prime agricultural land, wetlands, and stream headwaters in the same area near Hamilton's airport. We're calling for a moratorium on the conversion of farmland and natural areas until at least a complete review of city policies is completed in light of its declaration of a climate emergency. Wetlands are a crucial bulwark against both the causes and the results of the climate chaos we are facing. They are better carbon sinks than trees and critical sponges to cut flooding from increasingly extreme rainstorms. There are lots of old industrial lands abandoned or underutilized in Hamilton, including the 800 acres being released now by Stelco. These lands are much better suited to warehouses. They're located adjacent to the QEW, alongside the busiest port in the Great Lakes, and beside the mainline CNR. The plan to destroy the Garner Road Marsh in the headwaters of Ancaster Creek is part of a wide assault on Hamilton's wetlands and headwaters. It's additional to the already severely compromised waterways and ecological integrity across the community. Sewage and contaminated stormwater are already regularly damaging Cootes Paradise and Hamilton Harbor, Burlington Bay, and all the streams that flow into them. The same is true of the streams which flow across Hamilton's borders from this area into Niagara, Halton, and the Grand River watershed. The destruction of more headwaters and wetlands means more contamination and more likelihood of flooded homes and businesses downstream. This assault must stop. We have lost too much already, and we are already paying a huge ecological and flooding price that are both being rapidly worsened as climatic impacts multiply and intensify. The climate emergency and the ecological emergency can only be minimized by protecting all we have left and working to restore at least some of what we have lost. And that's why we need your help tonight to save the Garner Marsh, to stop similar attacks on neighboring farmlands and wetlands. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dawn. And it's been a real pleasure getting to know you and working with you and other volunteers at Hamilton 350 and Save Our Streams to protect the Garner Marsh up until this point. And you're right, this is a precedent-setting lawsuit and one that we are keen to engage with. So now please welcome Phil Pothen, the Ontario Environment Program Manager for Environmental Defence. Phil is a Toronto land use planning and environmental lawyer, and he has many years of experience advising, representing provincial policymakers, select small builders, and concerned residents all across the province. And he was really instrumental to us in the Stop Sprawl campaign, and he's really working his tail off for Ontario right now. So we're very grateful to have Phil here. He's fighting the big sprawl all over the place, and he needs superhuman stamina to tackle all those environmental issues. And I've heard that his way around that is Red Bull in his coffee. So thank you, Phil.
Hey, folks. So as Nancy mentioned, I'm a land use planning and environmental lawyer, and I lead the Ontario Environment Program at Environmental Defence. And I'm counsel for Environmental Defence in its opposition to the developer's Ontario Land Tribunal appeal regarding Garner Marsh. Now, a lot of you may know that Environmental Defence is a national environmental charity, which advocates for large-scale policy change at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. So why are we intervening in an OMB appeal about this particular marsh? Well, firstly, Environmental Defence views the protection of wetlands that remain in the Greater Golden Horseshoe and Southwestern Ontario as a matter of national and provincial significance. This ecoregion, it's called the Lake Erie Lowland, is one of the most impacted ecoregions in the entire country, to the point that it's designated as a crisis ecoregion. And only a tiny share of this region's original natural cover survives. And you just heard that 96% of Ancaster Creek's wetlands are already gone. But secondly, though, this appeal hangs on a really outrageous and dangerous proposition by the developer. And that is that the Conservation Authority has to let it destroy an existing functioning marsh, the Garner Marsh, as long as it promises to build what amounts to a stormwater pond after the fact. Hamilton's wetlands are protected by a regulation which bans development on wetland in the Conservation Authority's jurisdiction unless the Conservation Authority is of the opinion that flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, pollution, and the conservation of land will not be affected by the development. And the Conservation Authority was not convinced that the developer's promise just to build a stormwater pond was sufficient, even if delivered on, let alone reliably good enough to demonstrate that there wouldn't be harm to the conservation of land. And Environmental Defence agrees with that. And we are gravely concerned about the precedent that an after the fact promise to create an artificial wetland, let alone a stormwater pond, which is a very complicated exercise, not on exactly the same location, may be accepted as a reason to force conservation authorities to approve development. The whole exercise, it's highly speculative, it's scientifically complicated. There are no guarantees, even if you are earnestly trying to replicate the Garner Marsh, that you'd be able to do it, because each wetland is the product of the exact location where it developed, the hydrological conditions, the soil conditions underneath. So a replacement wetland is unlikely to be the same, and would be extraordinarily expensive to create one that was the same, which is not what the proponent is asking for here. And so our role in this proceeding is partly to protect the Garner Marsh in particular, but partly to protect the principle that conservation authorities have to be able to say no to wetland offsetting in general, or specifically in cases like this, where they're confident that it's not going to work. So Environmental Defense has been a long time expert organization on wetland offsetting policies. My director, Tim Gray, was part of a large-scale commission on that question. And so we're really well placed to advocate on that issue. But whether you care about the Garner Marsh specifically, or whether you're concerned about all the marshes in Ontario that would be endangered if this legal principle were to be accepted, I think it's really important that you throw your support behind this piece of litigation. Thanks, folks.
Thank you so much, Phil. That was an excellent recap. And we are beyond delighted that Environmental Defense has picked up the mantle and is going to fight this at the Ontario Land Tribunal along with us. So thank you so very much. So next, please, we're going to welcome a clip from Jacob Moon, who is a Hamilton-based guitarist and singer-songwriter of award-winning pop and folk songs. He's famous for his version of Rush's Subdivisions, recorded on the roof of the Staircase Theatre on Dundurn Street North. You should check it out. It's quite something. He's released a new album called Under the Setting Sun, and this is his latest single, A Little More Time.
I turned around and everything was changed. You always told me nothing stays the same. No one prepares you for the flood. Waves overtake you. You're only flesh and blood. And when the waters rise, we'll make for higher ground, only to see the devastation all around. Wish I could relive those days before all our dreams were swept away. But I just need a little more time. I could lose you overnight. Nothing is forever in this life. But I just need a little more time. Remember where I was when I heard the news, playing the tables, trying not to lose. Everybody lives like they'll never die. You were invincible, and baby, so was I. Sooner or later, all bravado fades away. All I can do is hope to fight another day. I know we're getting near the end, but can we carry on and just pretend? 'Cause I just need a little more time. I could lose you overnight. Nothing is forever in this life. And I just need a little more time to hold on or let go. This life we know. Oh, everybody's moving on. The last of the motorcade is gone, but I just need a little more time. As the evening sun is set, I still hear the last thing that you said.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks so much to Jacob for joining and being part of our rally. And I think it really speaks all the people that were coming. Like, we're really trying to send the message home that this is bigger than just one of us. This is a community-wide effort. And Phil just kind of hit home for us that it's not just the Garner Marsh that's at risk, that if this goes through, this is a very dangerous legal precedent for wetlands across the province. But it's also larger in a different way as well. And so, Nancy, we spent a lot of time talking about protecting the Garner Marsh so far in the program, but it doesn't just stop there, does it? There's more than just the Garner Marsh at risk of being lost forever.
That's correct, Alex. You're right. The Garner Marsh is just the first battle. There are hundreds of acres of farmland, wetlands, headwaters, forests, other vital natural areas that are at risk of being destroyed forever. And I'm going to paint a picture of what's coming down the pipeline now. Thank you very much, Reed. So first we need to go back in time to 2015, and that was the year of Hamilton's previous boundary expansion, when 1,300 acres of prime food land, along with wetlands, creeks, streams, headwaters, wildlife habitat, hedgerows, and forests were all swept into the urban boundary. But at that point, it wasn't for residential development, it was for industrial sprawl. It was called employment lands. That prime food land was rezoned from agriculture to employment land. And that means no people houses, but rather warehouses. So there was a tremendous amount of pushback at the time. A lot of citizens rallied, but unfortunately, eventually the plan was approved, and given its unpopularity, the Aerotropolis, as it was known at that time, was then rebranded to be known as the Airport Employment Growth District, or AEGD. So since then, the properties in the airport lands have changed hands many times as speculators bought, sold, flipped, and fortunes were made, as always happens when urban boundaries expand. But though some grow wealthy from this buy and sell game, Hamilton's wetlands, creeks, and trees, and nature in general are the losers, sacrificed in the name of progress and tax base. Next slide, please. Thank you. And not just nature, but also us. You know, the food eaters. Commodifying farmland in this matter always leads to the same outcome: pursuit of profit over common sense. These productive and verdant soils are viewed not as the valuable food land and habitat that they are, but instead as vacant land, clean slates which can be bought and sold without any regard for the activities, human or otherwise, that occur there. And they will serve as the perfect, pristine, and virgin canvases on which to drop millions of square feet of warehouses. Next slide, please. So if the big players don't think twice about destroying a farmer's flower or vegetable crops because they know that there'll be no consequences, is there anything at all stopping them from destroying those that can't speak for themselves or rise up in protest? The water, cattails, birds, foxes, bats, trees, and even the insects. No, these are inconsequential and a nuisance to be squared away with as little impact as possible to the bottom line. So when warehouses take precedence over prime agricultural land, over butternut trees and tributaries, and wetlands are built within meters of significant, and warehouses are built within meters of significant forests, which are spared only because developers are forced to preserve them, then we know we need to stand together to do something about it. And when significant wetlands are surrounded on 3 sides by concrete, again, mere meters from the shorelines, and when their free-flowing tributaries are tamed and compelled to be redirected to run their course so that they obediently flow between building 1 and building 2 so as not to cause any further inconvenience, that's when we know that we need to speak up for those who have no voice. The Garner Marsh is one of 5 or so warehouse development applications currently in the works for this precious land, but there is a better choice. It's putting warehouses where they belong in existing industrial zones, such as the Bayfront industrial area shown here. North of Burlington Street, this is Hamilton's first employment land, and the city is now promoting this area. It's perfectly connected to Hamilton's rail network. Oh, sorry, that's the slide with the port. It's perfectly connected to Hamilton's port. All that blue area is the port lands. And the next slide, please. It's perfectly served by 3 highways and major arterial roads, which are built to handle this kind of heavy truck traffic. And it's right beside it's very well connected to rail lines, which actually run all the way through it. So there's 3 major modes of transport that are already serviced and in place for this area. And also importantly, it would be better for our bank account because this area is already serviced with the infrastructure of wastewater and sewage and water already installed and paid for. In 2010, the estimated cost to taxpayers for servicing the AEGD with wastewater, water, et cetera, all that stuff that would be needed to be put in place on those farm fields was $500 million. That was in 2010. So we can be sure that that price has skyrocketed since then. And that's Hamilton taxpayers that will pay for that servicing. So starting April 1st, the city is asking for the public to provide feedback on the way forward for the Bayfront Industrial Zone. And so we're encouraging everybody to please sign up for the public information session on April 14th and take a moment to fill in the survey and tell the city to build 21st century warehouses that are several stories tall rather than these sprawling status quo monstrosities. And please put them where they belong, which is not on our mountain wetlands, but perhaps in an area like the Bayfront that already exists. So we'll post the link to that environment, to that Engage Hamilton city's request for public input in the chat a little later on. So thank you very much for listening. And I've made a short video of the marsh, and I hope that you will enjoy it.
Wow, thank you so much, Nancy, for that and for really painting such a clear picture of what's at stake. And if folks go, and we'll be putting our website links in the chat, but if folks go to the Save Our Streams website and check out our Wetlands Not Warehouses campaign page, they'll see that it's not just the Garner Marsh, but several important sites, all kind of neighboring within that AEGD. So other wetlands, other key forest areas that just aren't protected yet because we didn't look. And the Garner Marsh wasn't protected until citizens started getting involved. It wasn't on the city's core area mapping. The city didn't have a map of it, despite the fact that we all knew it was there. So it's clear that our protections could be reviewed. They have some glaring holes in it if they missed a wetland already. And we really do, as Dawn said, need a comprehensive picture of what's actually here and what needs to be protected before we can just be slotting in all of this development. And so, by holding the line on the Garner Marsh, by coming together and saying no, just like the Hamilton Conservation Authority has already done, and reinforcing the Conservation Authority's ability to say no, we can stop the loss. because it's time to protect and restore nature here in Hamilton. And, you know, it's about more than just the Garner Marsh, but saying no more loss from here on out. So to meet more of that nature that directly relies on the Garner Marsh and the other streams that start in this headwaters area, we're going to go back to Craig for part 2 of the Follow the Flow video to see where his adventure takes us next.
Welcome back. Are you ready to continue our journey downstream? The creek has just left the golf course, and as it does, it travels under Golf Links Road and into Golf Links Park, a pleasant forested area with a short hiking trail through the St. John's neighborhood of Ancaster. This 400-meter stretch isn't all that large, but it is a pleasant spot for a walk and a place for the kids to play. As it leaves the wooded trail, it crosses underneath the Ancaster Radio Trail through a residential neighborhood on the way to meet up with Rousseau Street. This is Ancaster Creek when it meets up with Rousseau Street. And if I turn around, so is this. Remember those warehouses that a developer wants to build back at the headwaters? They would be accompanied by acres of hard surfaces like parking lots that will repel water. That means oil, salt, and other harmful pollutants will immediately be washed into the creek without being filtered by a wetland. And with increased extreme weather events, the proposed stormwater pond would be overwhelmed, and it's possible that the creek, including this residential section, would flood. We're now into the section of the creek that most residents will be familiar with. It's just crossed under Wilson Street and makes a stunning appearance at the Ancaster Mill. Ancaster, one of Ontario's oldest settlements, was founded by James Wilson and Richard Beasley. But before they arrived, this site was the junction of well-established Indigenous trails. In 1791, Wilson and Beasley built a grist mill at this location, followed by a sawmill a year later. A couple of years after that, Wilson sold his interest in the mills to Jean-Baptiste Rousseau. But it was the employees of those mills that built some of the first homes in Ancaster. The original mill burned down in 1812, and the existing stone mill was built by the Eggleston brothers in 1863. So, from long-standing Indigenous trails to multiple mills built over centuries, this rich history stands as a testament to the strength of Ancaster Creek and why we need to preserve it. This is the easiest spot to see the water up close. And heck, you can even sit inside for a meal and listen to the roar of the water over Mills Falls. Nothing compared to here. I said the roar of Mills Falls is nothing compared to here. This is Sherman Falls, one of Hamilton's most iconic waterfalls. If you live in Hamilton, you've probably been here before. If not, then what are you waiting for? Parking is available in the HCA lot just up the road. The creek continues from Sherman Falls underneath Old Dundas Road across the Bruce Trail and continues north through private property. Since you won't be able to access it, you'll just have to admire it from above while on the Bruce Trail. But it's a beautiful area and gives us a hint of what we'll see downstream. Don't go anywhere. Enjoy the next few speakers, then I'll return for the conclusion of our adventure along the creek.
Well, that is fantastic, Craig. I've lived in Ancaster for 15 years and I've still not visited much of what you're showing us here. And I'm certainly learning a lot on this journey. So next, please welcome Jackie Ho, and she is the Protected Places Coordinator at Ontario Nature, a provincial organization dedicated to protecting wild species and spaces through conservation, education, and public engagement. Jackie has a background in biology and environmental policy and has volunteered with organizations including the Toronto Zoo, Toronto Wildlife Centre, and Emerging Leaders for Biodiversity. So thank you for joining us, Jackie.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me here today. I have to say I'm so inspired by all of the speakers here tonight, and I'm learning so much about this wetland. And in my short presentation today, I will be talking a little bit more about the importance of urban wetlands in the context of climate change. And I believe most of you here are already aware of the vital roles that wetlands play. And so my goal is to keep things short and simple and maybe provide some useful facts for wetland advocates. So next slide, please. As Nancy said, I am here representing Ontario Nature, and we are a provincial conservation organization representing over 30,000 members and supporters and over 155 member groups across Ontario. These groups make up our nature network and our strong grassroots voice for across the province for nature. Next slide. Connecting to Phil's point earlier, Ontario Nature is also concerned about the bigger picture of wetland policy and setting precedents that will have lasting impacts across our very large province. In Ontario, we can sometimes take wetlands for granted, but it's our responsibility to protect them. Canada has about 1/4 of the world's wetlands, and Ontario has another 1/4 of that. So wetlands across our landscape are very significant if you look nationally and globally. And so far, we're doing a very poor job of protecting them. Ontario across the province has lost over 72% of our historic wetlands, and this decline continues. So why does this matter? Next slide. Wetlands provide an enormous amount of benefits for the well-being of people, for our communities, and for nature. Benefits in abundance. Next. Here are just some of the benefits that I'm sure you're all familiar with, from wildlife refuges and movement, to water purification, to places for wild foods and medicines, and various forms of recreation and tourism. And connecting to all of the speakers before me, I'll emphasize again this connection to water, and that water connects all of us. Next. In particular, these three benefits make wetlands incredible nature-based climate solutions for climate adaptation and climate mitigation. Wetlands sit at the intersection of addressing climate change and biodiversity loss issues and are critically important for both. Next. Sorry. Wetlands are one of the most cost-effective and efficient ecosystems when it comes to carbon sequestration. Compared to other ecosystems like forests and grasslands, wetlands have the highest soil carbon density. Next. The amount of carbon stored in wetlands is disproportionate to the amount of land they take up. For example, wetlands occupy 5 to 8% of the global land surface, but account for 20 to 30% of the global soil carbon storage. In urban areas, costs associated with flood damages are drastically reduced by wetlands. I'll get more into that in a moment. And lastly, we all know wildlife and plants love wetland habitats. In Ontario, that means over 20% of our species at risk rely on them. Next. So what do we do with all of these wetland benefits? Well, the first rule should be to prevent their loss. Wetland degradation and conversion in Southern Ontario leads to loss of ancient carbon. Restoration and offsetting are often touted as solutions, but we must remember that untouched natural wetlands store more carbon than restored wetlands and more than modified or constructed wetlands. Next. One phrase I really like to say is that wetlands are nature's shock absorbers. Wetlands absorb much of the surface water runoff from heavy rain and moderate the water flow over the landscape. Next. Ontario put out, Ontario's Special Advisor on Flooding was a report that came out in 2019 that acknowledged the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme rainfall events in this province. We know floods are already impacting our communities, causing damages and hurting our neighbors. Wetlands are becoming more and more important as natural solutions to reducing flood damages and financial losses. A study commissioned by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry found that costs were reduced, flood damages and costs are reduced by 29% in rural areas and 38% in urban areas by having wetlands there. So they are very cost effective. Next. Continuing on economic arguments, wetlands provide benefits of over $51 billion in Southern Ontario. Wetland water purification benefits alone are valued at $4.2 billion. And while we don't always love commodifying or putting values on nature, that's a billion with a B. And so we cannot possibly replace all of this with wetland policy, with wetland offsetting and moving wetlands around. Next. So why are we here and what can we do? Together, we can show that the public won't stand for more wetland destruction. Over the last couple of years, we have seen where public protest has stopped the destruction of wetlands, like at Duffins Creek. We have seen the public stand up against minister zoning orders. And in Hamilton in particular, there has been a win where the public has banded together to stop urban settlement boundary expansion. And so for wetlands, these are some of the policies that we should be demanding from our elected municipal and provincial representatives. One is to increase Ontario's protected areas. Next is to expand the Greenbelt and expand the Greenbelt significantly. Third, we should implement the wetland conservation strategy for Ontario that the province has already created, but they haven't implemented well. And lastly, we need to integrate wetlands and climate change into municipal and conservation authority properties. The Garner Marsh needs the support of the local community, like all of you here tonight, and local voices can win the day. Next. So thanks so much. And I want to just leave you all with a message that we need to have hope. We need to inspire each other and make sure that decision makers understand what's at stake. So thanks for having me. And if anyone would like any of the information from my slide presentation tonight, feel free to contact me or the organizers, and I'm happy to share sources with everyone. Once again, thanks so much for standing up to protect the Garner Marsh. It really means a lot and it really matters. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Jackie. That was really awesome. And I think like what really stands out to me is this message of hope we keep hearing from some of our more provincial facing speakers, and about how what's happening here really connects. And so in this kind of spirit of connection, I'm really excited to be welcoming Andrew McCammon from the Ontario Headwaters Institute. And so we're going to talk more specifically about the importance of headwaters specifically and what that means for communities downstream. And so in a lot of ways, Jackie and Phil have been talking about almost upstream of the marsh, what's happening at the provincial level or the headwaters of kind of wetland policy. And so now we're really excited to be hearing from Andrew about the importance of protecting headwaters like the Garner Marsh. Andrew's worked in environmental positions with Environment Canada, Ontario. He's worked with conservation authorities and within municipalities in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. He became the executive director of the Ontario Headwaters Institute in 2009, and he's steered its evolution to be a full watershed management organization that it is today. Thanks so much, and excited to welcome you, Andrew.
Thank you so much to SOS Hamilton for inviting me to present today. I've been asked to provide a little bit of a description of what headwaters are, and then be passionate in explaining to people why it's so important that we protect them. My name is Andrew McCammon, and I'm the executive director of the Ontario Headwaters Institute. We kept the name for numerous reasons. while we went through a mandate change in 2018, and we are now a full watershed management organization. We remain a champion, however, of the ecological benefits that emanate from our headwaters, especially contiguous upland headwaters, as we will be addressing in Hamilton. So what are headwaters anyway? There are many forms of headwaters. It includes surface collection areas. That might be an upland forest. It could be the Oak Ridges Moraine, where there's no surface water because it's sand and the water percolates through to groundwater. It could be groundwater discharge in upwelling areas. That's what keeps a lot of our cool trout streams cool. When the groundwater infiltrates 7 miles downstream. Vernal ponds, spring-fed ponds, and offline wetlands, and first, second, and third order streams. That's our wheelhouse, and it's not very complicated. The first order stream is one with no tributaries. Becomes a 2 when 2 first order come together. 16 additional first order streams could enter. The 2 won't change until it meets with another 2. Why are they important? They're important because they drain a majority of the surface area of a watershed. They constitute the majority of stream length. They contribute the majority of flow. So in spite of the Star Lake Ontario Salmon Fishing Derby and the $200,000 cigarette boats that people like to have pictures of, headwaters are the major form and major contributing ecological value of watercourses. They help regulate the flow of surface water, furnish key habitat types, and they nurture and inform downstream ecosystems by providing significant portions of a watershed's nutrients and other key matter. They are more important now than ever because our increasing population is moving upstream from cities along Lake Ontario and spreading outward from inland cities such as Brantford, which is not too far from Hamilton. The associated increase in urban boundaries has left many headwater areas as the de facto reservoirs, having depleted natural heritage and having polluted water and filled in all the wetlands in our urban areas. We believe that further intrusion along existing planning norms in headwater areas could result in tipping points to whole watersheds. It is ill-advised headwater development could cascade downstream, imperiling whole watersheds. Negative impacts would obviously include significant reductions in insects, which are ignored, but are the important base of the food chain with impacts on regional biodiversity. Reductions in natural cover, which again would lessen biodiversity, but also climate resistance. And natural cover also, reducing it would also increase runoff, flooding, and erosion. You'd have reduced agriculture and therefore reduced local food security locally. And of course, as we talked about earlier, reduced nutrients and sediment needed for downstream health. Our conclusion and our passion that we were asked to share, therefore, is that as downstream areas become more populated and many seek to expand their urban boundaries, it is more important than ever to protect our reservoirs of headwater health in order to in turn protect the watershed's long-term ecological, economic, and social well-being. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I couldn't be here in person today. Have a wonderful webinar and meeting.
Well, Andrew mentioned something there that I think is really important and is often overlooked, and that is the importance of insects. I agree. The marsh provides habitat and breeding grounds for insects, which are really crucial food sources for bats and birds and reptiles and other small animals. So yeah, demolishing the marsh means demolishing that vital food source. So speaking of creatures in and around the marsh, we're moving to our final speaker now. And the most passionate one, there's no one better suited to comment on who's who at the marsh than Ancaster farmer Carrie Hewitson, who lives right beside it, and she explores the area every day. Carrie is a bird nerd and nature nut, a local farmer and food security champion. She cares deeply about saving farmland and ensuring food comes from close by and stays local. Carrie works to preserve natural buffers, wetlands, and green spaces, ensuring her feathered friends keep their habitat and have a home to return to year after year. And because Carrie lives on a farm with limited Wi-Fi, she's right here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. So my name is Carrie Hewitson. I live at 254 Garner Road East, and the property in question, 140 Garner Road, is directly in our backyard. We, for the past several years, have farmed around the area, and due to the proposed development, we're no longer able to farm the land. But despite that, we still care very deeply about what happens to it. Last year, we launched a campaign to save Garner Marsh, and together we did, but our victory was short-lived. Now we find ourselves fighting to preserve its destruction once more. This land, the marsh, and all those that call it home have no voice. We must be their voice. Together, we must stand up. This land and the marsh all hold a very special place in my heart, because this land, this marsh, beats with the pulse of life. It is the very heart and soul of nature itself, its essence. Here, with each season and every migration, life cycles play out, the renewal of life and the bitterness of death. We get to witness this fragile balance, this interconnectedness, this web of life. You have but to take a walk out back to see the abundance of life that exists there. The evidence of its endurance and its will to survive are all around us. Tracks, scat, bone, blood, and feathers. I am continually in awe of the diversity of species that live here. So many birds and animals call this place home, but for how much longer? It is hard to imagine a time when they might not exist, but that time may be here sooner than any could ever have thought. I've had the privilege to witness and share in the many journeys and migrations that take place here. The change in weather heralds our first visitors, the tundra swans and the Arctic geese. They pause here on their migration route, resting and feeding before continuing on with their arduous journey. The marsh in spring vibrates with birdsong and life. At dusk, the American woodcock calls out, meet, meet, showing off to any female around. As the frogs and toads thaw out from winter, peepers find their voice. All call out amid the cacophony of spring. Cedar waxwings then return en masse. Their distinctive beauty can be seen as they return to gorge on last season's fruiting trees and berries. We see the return of songbirds, swallows, and killdeer. We see the return of warblers and wrens, bluebirds, goldfinches, and hummingbirds, all looking to nest and begin that next cycle of life. The marsh plays host to larvae, which then emerge as dragonflies and damselflies. Midges, beetles, and other insects proliferate, creating vital food sources for returning bird species and other local bat populations. Milkweed grows in abundance here along the edges of the marsh and surrounding fields, creating a safe haven for monarchs, swallowtail butterflies, and other butterflies and moths, natural pollinators, all vital to the local ecosystem. Amongst the cattails and the reeds, we see the red-winged blackbirds. They nest here in abundance. Over the marsh, we see orioles using the available grasses and cattail fluff to weave their hanging nests on nearby trees, making this place their home for yet another season. As spring turns to summer, snakes come out, start to sun themselves on the open paths and on rock piles. From the deer tracks, the coyote prints, to the wild turkey tracks and feathers, all animals leave their mark here. We see large holes chopped into dead and dying trees, evidence of the hard work of the various species of woodpeckers that thrive here. Great horned owls nest in the tall spruces and hunt here, leaving regurgitated pellets for us to find at the base of trees. The cavities of dead and rotting trees provide shelter and prime nesting opportunities for barred owls, screech owls, and great gray owls. We can hear their distinctive calls throughout the different seasons. Amongst the fallen willows and the pines, where the stream does widen, there are families of weasels and fox dens. Even now at this time of year, we are greeted almost daily with foxes visiting us, demonstrating their inquisitive and playful nature. Overhead and along the fields, we often see hawks soaring. They regularly perch on the tallest trees along the marsh, gaining the best vantage point for hunting. Some of the hawks are visitors and some are full-time residents. Cooper's hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, red-tailed hawks, and northern harriers can all be found here. And soon, the broad-winged hawk will return from its wintering grounds down south and join them here. Within and around the marsh, we are graced with two different falcon species, small but fierce and lethal in their own right. The American kestrel and the merlin perch on reeds and small branches, waiting to chase down or pounce on their next meal. These relatively scarce falcons take advantage of the smaller birds and vermin found along the marsh and fields. Their dazzling flights are truly a sight to behold. From the tiniest of songbirds to the great raptors that patrol these skies, from the field mouse to the fox, they are all part of the cycles and patterns that exist here, each inherent to each other's survival, perhaps even to our own. Margaret Atwood, celebrated Canadian author and fellow bird lover, once said, "What is killing them, the birds, will eventually kill us. They are the canaries in the mines." Powerful words, and perhaps a foretelling of a grim future if we do not heed the warnings. As our cities continually seek to expand their borders, Ancaster and Hamilton included, they do so by pushing their sprawl, their giant industrial warehouse complexes, their unaffordable housing, and their unnecessary highway expansions into and onto the very lands they are supposed to be protecting. They seize our farmland, reducing our ability to keep food sources close to communities, destroying buffers and corridors for wildlife and farming to coexist. They seize our green spaces, our wetlands, our natural waterways, which for centuries have been actively sequestering carbon, helping to offset global warming and provide vital habitat for a myriad of species. In these times and circumstances that we are confronted with, the invasive species we should fear the most are developers and some politicians. Those that have deemed economic growth and urban expansion as more important than land preservation. They have shown us time and time again that the extinction crisis and climate change are an acceptable trade for their greed and their so-called progress. They pose the greatest risk to our green spaces and wetlands, to our farmland and all of its many inhabitants. Please help us before it's too late.
Wow, that she brings tears to my eyes, honestly. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for being so passionate. And thank you for your years of contribution in providing Hamiltonians with a fresh local food source and for stewarding the land as you do. It's a shame that Hamilton will lose farmers like you because of pressure from developers, because you've now sold up and are leaving, unfortunately. So this really goes to show that so many of us take Hamilton's creeks and streams for granted, but we shouldn't. Hamilton is the city of waterfalls. And as somebody just put in the chat, and it's got me laughing, I don't want to be the city of waterfalls. Hamilton is the city of waterfalls for now, brought to you by creeks and streams. So let's do our best to restore and maintain them. And we can start by protecting the headwaters on the mountain. So joining Alex and I now is Mike Balkwill, who is the campaign director for Wellington Water Watchers. Alex and Mike, we've heard from farmers and water protectors, wetland and headwater specialists, politicians, lawyers, and activists. And we follow the flow from the headwaters down to the Coots. Not quite to Coots, we've got one more segment of Follow the Flow to go. But for now, just before we finish off with that final segment, what do we have to do to save the marsh?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. And I'm really glad you asked. And I think this is really why we're all here today. So we have 3 simple steps for folks to save the marsh, and that's all something that we can do here today. And so within the chat, there's going to be some links being put in, and we really do encourage folks to use them. But really just, we've heard from Sandy, we've heard from folks at Ontario Nature, we've heard from Phil from Environmental Defense about how much bigger this fight is. And we've also heard a lot about what our responsibility is living in Canada and Ontario with so much water, yet having also lived through so much wetland loss. What our responsibilities are really in these moments. And so when we come together and take these steps, like with Stop Sprawl, like with pushing back against MZOs, like with so many other of these wins, we can get the big changes we know we need, and we know that future generations we deserve. So we've created a take action page right on our website. The link is in the chat, and we are asking folks to sign our petition to City Council, and that's calling on a moratorium on building on wetlands, farmlands, and other key natural areas until we've reviewed the system that is here and ensure that both the impacts of climate change and the impacts on our food land are taken into account when considering development on natural areas. So you can sign and share the petition. We've also set up an easy one-click letter tool so you can send that message directly to your councillor and have more of a in-depth conversation. Because there's so much to write about, and I'm sure you've all heard so much tonight, we do have some key points there that may jog your memory. And we really do encourage folks to spend some time making their individualized email. But one of the biggest things folks can do to help out the campaign right now is to donate to the fight. We've heard that we're going to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and we know that we need to both raise public awareness as we head into that campaign, but we also are going to have to pay for some costs that are associated with participating in the Ontario Land Tribunal. And one of those is expert witness costs and other types of technical expertise that we'll need to hire to really make sure that we can report back to you and say, we saved the Garner Marsh. And so, Mike, I'm going to throw it over to you about how we get from where we are to where we need to be, because I think we're all on the same page. We want to save the Garner Marsh.
Hi, Alex and Nancy, and thank you for tonight. I live in Toronto, and I didn't know the Garner Marsh before tonight, and now I feel like I know the Garner Marsh, or at least I know it a lot better, and I feel connected to it, and I feel like I want to protect it, and I wonder if that's how other people are feeling. And you've done a very, very good job tonight of saying that how you can protect the Garner Marsh and how that's connected to other things. The case at the OLT, as Phil was telling us, will not only decide the fate of the Garner Marsh, but perhaps the whole approach to wetlands. And winning at the OLT, at the Ontario Land Tribunal, could stop wetland replacement. This is huge. This is very, very significant. And as there are two things that you've told me you want to do, and it's important in moments like this, which is to demonstrate clear, visible public opposition, and to have experts that can represent you at the OLT. Excuse me. And you've got the best. You've got environmental defense, and you've got experts that you're hiring. And what I want to say to the people who are listening in is you have a chance to make a real difference here, to protect the Garner Marsh and to protect wetlands across Ontario, as this is potentially a precedent-setting case. Now, I know that tomorrow morning, Alex and Nancy and others are going to be saying, okay, how much can we afford? How much time can we buy from the expert? How many Facebook ads, social media ads, newspaper ads, rallying can we do to show that the public is opposed to this? And so what we want to do now is ask you for donations so that Alex and Nancy and others can plan with confidence tomorrow a vigorous, strong campaign to protect the Garner Marsh and to stop, hopefully, wetland replacement. It even sounds goofy to me to say that, wetland replacement, to stop wetland replacement in Ontario. So they want to raise, the budget they think they need to have a very, very strong case is $30,000. And here's the good news. There's been commitments before tonight already of $13,000. So really, we need to just about double what's already happened. And Nancy's clapping her hands, and I think it's a good thing for people in the audience to clap along, put comments in the chat box. So I'm going to ask people if they'll make pledges. I'm going to describe this to you while you think about a pledge that you can make and the amount of pledge you can make. There will be a link. There is a link in the chat box now, and your donation to through the Small Change Fund will earn you a charitable tax receipt. We're asking you to make a pledge tonight. You can take some time to fulfill your pledge, but as I say, Alex and Nancy need to know tomorrow morning how much they're going to be able to plan for their budget. So I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to start with kind of a big number. And I'm going to say, is there someone who's listening in who would pledge $2,000? That's a little more. Somebody can help me with my quick math. That's about 15% of what we need to raise to match what's already been donated tonight. And so I'm asking if there's somebody out there who'll make a pledge. Now, Alex and Nancy, this is a bit like a telethon, except we don't have telephones behind us. And I know that people are watching. You need to maybe talk to somebody else who's sitting with you in your household. You've got to actually reach over to the keyboard from whatever comfortable place you're sitting in and find the chat box. And you've got to type in, yes, I'm willing to pledge $2,000. And all that takes a little bit of time. So Alex and Nancy, I want to, as people are thinking about my ask, I want to ask you, I saw Craig's his name, right? I saw him in his boots in the wetland, made me want to put my boots on, get out in my backyard, which is a little wet and soggy too today. Have you been down to the wetlands yourself? Have you been there in your boots?
I've been there in my chest waders, and I was so grateful that I was wearing chest waders because I did get stuck in the mud a few times. And yes, absolutely. I have been there a lot because it's only about 10 minutes from my home. And I like to go visit my friend Carrie. She cooks a mean soup and she knows the wetlands so well. It's really awesome to just walk around there. She's always looking at the ground and looking for tracks and scat and things like that. And I just wander around and learn from her.
In your chest waders so you can keep warm and dry. So I'm wondering if there's somebody out there right now who's warm and dry who has offered to pledge $2,000 towards the campaign. And there it is. Craig has just $2,000. Wow, Craig.
Craig, oh, that's kind of you.
Thank you very much. I want to ask if there's somebody who'll follow along with Craig and now pledge $1,500. Because 1,500, this is where you have to help me with my math, everybody. Use all of the fingers and toes you have. 2,000 plus 1,500 is 3,500, and Ginny just pledged $100. Thank you, Ginny.
Oh.
So I know people need to talk about this, and somebody else has pledged $100.
Oh. So Dawn just matched Craig. Thank you so much, Dawn. That's 2,000.
Craig. So I missed that in the chat box. So that's 2,000 plus 2,000. Is that what you're saying to me? Plus 50, right. 2,000 plus 2,000. I have to have people help me with this. Ooh, and Jim Quinn just pledged $2,000. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, and Jim Quinn, oh my gosh, another $2,000 from Jim. Yes, that's right. And I don't know how to pronounce the name, Karign. That's a tricky one for me, but thank you. That's $100 there.
Arjun, thank you. Well, those three $2,000 donations have got us halfway to doubling the pledge we had already. Is there somebody who will pledge $1,000? Now, Alex, I'm talking to you for a minute here because people have to kind of talk to each other and say about $1,000. And I'm admiring the plants behind you. Did they come from the Garner Marsh?
No, they did not. So it's really Save Our Streams. We're really excited because at all of our streams in Hamilton, we have folks coming from the headwaters and we have folks downstream. So folks like Nancy, Craig, Carrie are all up at the Garner Marsh. Folks like me and Zoe are right down in Dundas. And we're going to see in the next fall the flow with Craig right where the Ancaster Creek meets up with the stream in my community. So while these plants aren't here, they certainly do get water from Hamilton Harbor, and it's all part of the same system.
Now, speaking of following the flow, Alex, I noticed that Jean Jacobs has pledged $100 and Ava Rakowski has pledged $100. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so following the flow, just before we move along, I'm wondering if somebody else will pledge $1,000. Kind of half of a Craig or half of a Don or half of a Jim Quinn. And while people are thinking about that, Carol just said $5,000.
Who's Carol? Oh my goodness.
Who's Carol? Thank you, Carol.
No, thank you, whoever you are. Thank you, Carol.
Can you tell us, Carol, who you are?
I think I might know who Carol is actually. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
So that's
fantastic.
Our goal was to double the 13. We're at 11,000 plus because there've been several $100 donors, and watching along at the somebody has an abacus. Do you know what an abacus is, or am I dating myself? You know, with a little beat, you move along. I keep thinking for this, we need a kind of an online abacus. So here we go. Kathy pledged $500. Kathy's at home. Thank you. Jan Willem, if the name is accurate, pledged $1,000. Alex Wilson just was happy to pledge $400.
Oh.
Alex, $400 is a very nice number. It's kind of a four directions kind of number, and I think that's, you know, a very aligned of you to make a $400 donation. So I'm waiting for somebody off screen is counting, and I'm waiting to see what the latest total is. I wonder if there's anybody else who would donate $500, because I think we're getting close to doubling the 13 to be 26. And actually, I think you told me that you really want to have a commitments of 30,000 by tomorrow. So I'm going to ask, as we're here, if there's anybody who would donate $400 to match Alex. It's a kind of a aligned four directions kind of donation. Are my four directions working? And that will bring us closer to our goal. Now, Bruce has just donated 100. Thank you.
Oh,
thank you, Bruce.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh my gosh.
So Mike.
And just while people are thinking about how much they can pledge, and we're going to open it up now. People, you have been very, very generous, and you're going to help Alex and Nancy and the steering committee have a good sleep tonight. They're not going to be fretting about this. They're going to have a good sleep and probably have a good breakfast so they can get up and say, all right, really, how do we get going here? But tell us a little bit about the timeline while we're here. Do you have any sense of when when you're going to the OLT? Aden,
thank you, Anne. Thank you very much.
And Aidan Amer did some math and said we're at 13.6, and Kathy and Mal just donated $500, which puts us at 14.1. Thank you. Nancy, tell us a little bit about the timeline. And while Nancy's doing that, please, folks, think about the pledge that you can make. And Aidan just pledged $50. Thank you very much for now. And he'll ask around. That's a very good thing to ask others to make donations too.
Hey, Mike.
Sandy, do you have your, yeah, it looks like Sandy has her hand up there.
So I'm going to donate my partner got the rebate from his license fees, and I'm gonna he doesn't know, but I'm gonna donate his and mine, so that's $270.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Sandy and partner.
And that's a very good tip, Sandy. That's a very good tip to everybody to donate their license to their favorite environmental cause or to their favorite candidate, which is what I did in my neighborhood. I donated it to my favorite not conservative candidate. I donated it to my favorite wetland protecting candidate. Doris has pledged $100. Thank you, Doris.
Thank you, Doris.
I know, Nancy, I'm trying to get you on here to talk about the timeline a little bit, but I am going to interrupt you and other people make a donation. So go ahead, Nancy.
Yes, well, we have a case management conference coming up on May 9th, and that's something that people can send us an email on our website if you want to take part in that. They're very progressive, and it's done through telephone conference call. So they thank 270 from Doug Ford. Thank you, Sandy. Yes, so they do a big telephone conference call, and if you want to be a participant and listen into how an OLT hearing goes, then you're welcome to visit our website, and you'll see how it works, and we'll fill in the paperwork for you and get you there. And then they don't actually expect that the hearing will occur until maybe in 2023, because there's a lot to gather, and I'm pretty sure the OLT is very busy with lots of MZOs and things right now.
Nancy, Marianne has just said she's been wondering what to do with her $120 check from Doug Ford. Remember, that's our own money, right? It's not Doug's,
it's our money.
Our money. He's giving us back the money. And by the way, wouldn't we rather have that $1 billion go towards public services and be given back to us in this way? But thank you, Marianne, for that 120. Thank you, Sandy, for the suggestion, because that's got people thinking. I'm going to wait for somebody to give me a total, but I think we're close to we're at 14.6, so less than $2,500, and we'll be at 30,000. So I'm just going to put out there, Nancy and Alex, and then I'm going to give it back to you, okay? I'm going to put out there that I'm pretty sure there's some people who are shy and modest.
I think there is actually, Carol has just sent me a message saying we pledge an additional 3,000.
Well, that's very nice.
Fantastic. And
Yes.
I know,
So
thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That takes us over 30,000. Folks, if you're still thinking and you want to make a donation, Jim Quinn says if I can figure out how to cash Diane's check for her license rebate, I will donate that as well. Thank you, Jim. Hareen says we're at 17 and change. We started at 13. We're over 30,000. People, you may like a telethon, just getting your telethon vibe. You may want to afterwards, you know, some people are modest, Alex, and they don't actually want to say how much they want to donate. They just want to go and make a donation. That's terrific. Folks, you've all been very generous tonight. This is very significant action you're taking. I know that Alex and Nancy and the others are going to keep you informed about what's going forward. I like to say there are people who say we shouldn't be NIMBYs and protect our backyard, but really we're at the stage now where all of our backyards are connected. My backyard is your backyard. All of our backyards are connected. We have to work hard to protect them together. That applies to wetlands too. Protecting the Garner Marsh protects all wetlands in Ontario. That's what's important about this. Thank you, Alex and Nancy, for allowing me to be here to help you out tonight. And I'm going to give it back to you. I know there's a little bit more to do before the night's over. And thank you, everybody who's watching, who's made donations and have empowered Nancy and Alex to have a good night's sleep and to make good, strategic, confident decisions in the morning.
Thanks so much, Mike. And yeah, we're going to let folks get to bed soon, but we do want to make sure that we get to the third piece of the Follow the Flow video. But just because Mike's kept saying Alex, Nancy, and the others, I do want to just highlight that you too can be one of these others. We are always looking for help to make this fight winnable. And I think hopefully the lesson we've learned tonight is that we're bigger and we're stronger and we can take on more when more folks get engaged. So we're so blown away by folks' generosity in our community today. There's been so many campaigns coming out because so much needs to be protected right now. So we understand this isn't the only ask people are getting. So grateful for everyone's generosity. And, you know, there's more than one way to get engaged. So whether that's kind of reaching out to friends to help donate, whether that's signing the petition, whether that's sending a letter to your city council, or whether it's getting engaged and helping us put on our next rally or coming to the case conference on the 9th, there's a place for you in this movement and we want to invite you into it. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if I haven't forgotten anything, I will say, yeah, any donations are tax deductible because we're going through the small change fund. So we also have to thank them and everyone from the Wellington Water Watchers for helping us pull this together and for their unending assistance and tech support. And yeah, Nancy, if you don't have any, why don't I give it to you for some final words and then we'll finish with our Follow the Flow.
Okay, yes, I just wanted to say like my deepest and our deepest gratitude to everyone who took the time to come out here tonight and who, you know, who have donated. And I was trying to keep up with the chat and I will save the chat and we'll know who you are. And I'm so sorry if we didn't mention your name out loud because I know there was names going by, but I really am so grateful to you all. Thank you so much for helping us with, you know, our aim is to save this precious place. So thank you for sharing our action page and for everything that you've done tonight. I think I'll stop talking and we'll just watch the rest of the Follow the Flow.
Welcome back, and will you look at this? This is the most pristine part of the watershed, and looking down into the valley from above, it feels like we're miles and miles away from civilization. This is what most of the watershed would have looked like before settlers arrived. Much of this area includes very old trees, including huge hemlocks, black cherry, and oak species. And there are a lot of trees in here, but when considering the entire sub-watershed, the forest cover still falls short of what Environment Canada identifies as the bare minimum. There's only 28.5% coverage, and the target is 30%. And when there isn't enough vegetation, erosion becomes a problem. And that means the water is full of mud and pollutants. It's also in this area that Ancaster Creek and Sulphur Creek merge to become what's called Coldwater Creek. Now, historically this water was cold, but it has warmed up because of human impact. It's colder than other creeks because the source water is spring-fed. If the builder gets their way and the Garner Marsh is destroyed and replaced with a stormwater pond, then much of that source water will be left to warm in the sun while sitting in the pond. And that means even warmer water downstream. Among the at-risk fish species are rainbow and fan-tailed darter, brassy minnow, and 3 kinds of dace. Further disturbances upstream would be a huge blow to these sensitive species. In 2017, starting in this section and working downstream, a team from the McMaster Biology Department established 5 biodiversity monitoring stations that will assess changes over time. If you've ever been on the rail trail through Dundas, then you know this spot. Officially, it's called Powers Crossing, and it gives you a beautiful upstream view of the creek. This area was once the Cold Spring Valley Nature Sanctuary and owned by the Royal Botanical Gardens until 1963. It was sold to McMaster and they paved over it, creating this monstrous parking lot called Parking Lot M. But there are big plans proposed to return this area to nature. The vision is to tear up all this pavement and recreate the marsh that was here, but with an artistic flair. It would turn all of this into a wetland that looks like this. Can you see the outline of a monarch butterfly? If accomplished, it would make Mac the first university to restore a wetland. That would be a huge accomplishment and something to be immensely proud of. But it would be tragic to have innovative restoration efforts at this end of the creek while allowing destructive development at the headwaters. This is the edge of the property where the creek runs today. As we've seen, this water is all connected and the myriad negative impacts upstream will accumulate here. This area around McMaster is also where our creek intersects with Spencer Creek, right there. This is also a very important area for the breeding of snapping turtles. Over the past several years, the Royal Botanical Gardens, along with several other local organizations, have invested a lot of effort to increase the local turtle population. But loss of natural habitat, invasive species and pathogens, and water contamination in the area are all factors working against them. The McMaster Marsh restoration would be a huge boost, but again, counteracting all this hard work here with destructive development upstream ignores the interconnectedness of the ecosystem. And here we are back at Coots Paradise. That's the mouth of Ancaster Creek right behind me. After meandering through Ancaster, then tumbling over the escarpment into Dundas for some 13 kilometers, battling an endless barrage of stressors, Ancaster Creek has finally arrived here. It started quietly underground in the Garner Marsh, and now its waters will flow into Burlington Bay, Lake Ontario, and beyond. Before today, many of us might not have understood the impact our society has on water. But maybe, after taking this journey with me and following the flow of Ancaster Creek, you've started to gain an appreciation for it. We go about our busy lives, working hard to survive in a challenging world, and doing our best to raise our kids and give them a bright future. And we don't think much about the water flowing through our community. and it is the future we should be thinking about. We need water to survive. We need wetlands like the Garner Marsh to mitigate the extreme storms we are so often experiencing now. We need the biodiversity of the marsh because it forms the base of the food web that supports us. We need all those things, but the Garner Marsh and all of Ancaster Creek need us too. They need us to preserve and protect them. They can't speak up for themselves, but they have supported the peoples of this area for thousands of years, and now it's time for us to repay that debt. Today, they need your voice to speak up and say no. No to their destruction, and no to more pollution in the water. No to building on wetlands. No to endless sprawl development. We need wetlands, not warehouses. Let's work together to save the Garner Marsh.
Thanks everyone so much for sticking around with us throughout the night and for all of your help in getting this going. I'm sure you've got a lot of emails from us this week in the lead up to tonight, so we'll give you a bit of a break, but we'll be sure to be in touch about what's coming up next at the case conference hearing at the ULT, as well as some of those other development proposals that are impacting wetlands across Hamilton's Mountain. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we hope you have a really great night.